All right, so now we're back, and problem 2, this is one of my favorite ones because petroleum or oil is really such an important part of our life. It's an important market. So let's just get our heads on together here about this. Let's put quantity in this axis. We'll put oil, and we'll put the price of oil right here as well. All right, and I'm going to draw the demand curve as relatively, this should make sense now, inelastic. All right, so here's our demand curve for oil. All right, and it says, for example, in the market for oil, in the short run, demand and supply are both elastic. Demand and supply are both elastic. Well, let me draw what I think most of us would agree looks like the oil market, certainly in the short run. All right, there's demand, there's supply. We'll call this D0, we'll call this S0. So why have I drawn them so vertically? Well, the reason is because they are relatively inelastic. And just to make sure we're all together in this, all right? Inelastic means what? It means if I raise the price by a substantial amount, the quantity demanded is not going to change very much. All right? That's what inelastic means. So if I draw these curves in and draw these lines down here, as you should, just to help yourself with these problems, if this is the original price, P0, this is the price after it's risen, this is the initial quantity, Q0, Q1 is the quantity after we've risen, the price has increased, you can see rather clearly now that the decrease in quantity demanded is relatively modest as compared to the increase in price. That's inelastic. Inelastic, doesn't stretch much, relatively insensitive to changes in price. All right? So, back to your answer here. Supply and demand are both elastic. Well, if they were elastic, how would they look? Just quickly draw it out for yourself, just so we're contrasting it. Again, same market, we'll put Q here, we'll put P here. If it's relatively elastic, it looks something like this. All right, that's a demand curve. Relatively elastic supply curve looks something like this. All right, we'll call this D0, call this S0. And now we're showing you that basically if you change price a little bit, big things are going to happen in these markets. So let's increase the price by about the same amount we did before, and notice what happens to quantity demanded. Again, it's just useful to draw these things out because you get in the habit of doing this. It makes answering these problems much easier. Here's Q0, here's Q1, here's P0, here's P1. So I've tried to increase price by about the same amount as I did on this graph, where the curves are clearly inelastic. And on this graph, I've increased the price the same amount, and the curves are clearly much more elastic. And look what's happened. The decrease in quantity demanded in this market is profound relative to the increase in price. So this is elastic, and this is inelastic market. All right? And the question is, which one do you think is the market for oil in the short run? Well, we'll keep going here. Is elastic, the demand is elastic and supply is inelastic. So now it says demand is elastic and supply is inelastic. And just to save us another drawing, I'll go over here where demand is elastic and supply, we'll call this a different supply curve, is relatively inelastic. We'll call this S1, all right? Now we have a relatively elastic demand curve and a relatively inelastic supply curve. Does that characterize the oil market in the short run? Well, the supply curve does, but the demand curve does not. So that answer is not going to be very, very successful. Last one is D, is inelastic. Demand is inelastic and supply is elastic. So now demand, they're saying, is inelastic and supply is elastic. Looks something like this. Call this S1. Well, again, we've got the demand curve right. That's relatively inelastic. But we don't have the supply curve right. Supplies of oil in the short run are not inelastic. You know, digging and drilling and going to Alaska and finding new oil is a very expensive, protracted process, often with many failures when wells don't pan out. So supply curves tend to be not only, well, they're certainly inelastic in the short run. And the notion that they're even elastic in the long run is probably a stretch somewhat. Okay, but they're certainly more elastic in the long run. But the answer clearly is, the answer is going to be B, supply and demand are both inelastic, which is what we drew right here when we're talking about oil in the short run, it's really an inelastic commodity. Okay? Thanks.